Today we're joined by Philippe Mesmer. He's the correspondent of Le Monde to Japan and the Korean Peninsula. And we are going to talk about North Korea because Philippe has been there 4 times. So welcome, Philippe.
Thank you very much.
So tell us, first of all, how many times have you been in North Korea and through which years have you been?
I have been there 4 times, from 2012 to 2015. So most of the time it has been for special events. In 2012, it was for the 100th anniversary of Kim Il-sung, the founder of the North Korea, and for the Pyongyang International Film Festival. In September 2012.
So this is they have a film festival in North Korea? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, there is a very important film festival, which is organized once every 2 years, and which have some very special movies, especially from Russia or from India, or for maybe not what we used to see at Cannes or in Venezia, but it's.
But how
Yeah,
international
it's a
it
film
is? Is it very
Sorry?
international? Is it mostly Asian producers and films?
No, in 2012 there was also French movies, European movies, and I met some French people also who went there because they have been invited. You have Chinese film, of course, Russian movies. You don't have US movies, you don't have South Korean movies. I think there were no Japanese movies too. So I mean the worst enemies are not introduced to this festival. But I mean it used to be an important festival because, as you may know, Kim Jong-il especially was very fond of cinema. He wrote a book about cinema, and he supported the production. And there is a very huge open air studio near Pyongyang, with different settings. I mean, from the Joseon era, which is the Middle Age of Korea, to a modern, I mean, 1950s city of South Korea. So yeah, it's interesting to visit that.
Well, you've been there as well? You've been to the
Yes,
Hollywood?
I visit. Yes, I visited this Hollywood, a made
Yeah,
in Korea Hollywood style studio. Yeah.
interesting. So 12, when was the last time that you've been there?
It was in 2000, I think 2016. Yeah.
Okay. And what are the major changes that caught your attention that you immediately saw after a few years of wow, I mean, that something is changing in this country?
So interestingly, I went in 2012 for the 100th anniversary of Kim Il-sung. It was just after Kim Jong-un reached power. I mean, after his father's death in December 2011. And at that time, so it was still very old style, everything in Pyongyang. But when I went again in 2015, lots of things have been changed. I mean, in Pyongyang at least, because it's mostly where I stayed. It was, I mean, you had a smartphone almost everywhere. You had taxi services that had been created. You had new districts built in the city. So you felt that some things had changed. And basically, when you look at the economic policy of the government, you see that there had been some reforms in 2012, 13, and 14 in agricultural and industry that led that movement to some kind of modernization.
I'm curious already, I have a couple of questions. So you mentioned cell phones, you mentioned taxis. So who would be the average person that be using these cell phones? And would you have an open Wi-Fi access? How do these things work? And also, who would be the average customers for the taxi? government people,
So,
or just the average person?
so basically, one important thing is that it's a tradition in Asia, but the capital city of a country has to be the leading city of the country and to show the foreigners how advanced is the country. So Pyongyang is like that. And Pyongyang is concentrating, of course, the elite of the regime, but also the upper class of the middle class, I would say. So you don't have very, very poor people in Pyongyang, which means that basically those are people who have the enough money to get a smartphone and can take a taxi in case of necessity. Basically, the network has been built by an Egyptian company, who dealt with the government and had the right to establish the network in North Korea. So it's an Egyptian network, and lots of people have their smartphone. You don't have Wi-Fi. At least at that time, we didn't have Wi-Fi. I couldn't connect my personal smartphone to the network. My only access on internet was from the hotel. So that's the main thing. And I also noticed more supermarkets or more shops with lots of foreign brands, lots of Italy, I must say, because
For example, what kind of brands? Like Barilla, the pasta? What
no,
kind of
it was mainly wine.
wine?
Wine,
Okay.
yes, because there was an Italian company who used to work on, how do you call it? I mean, amusement parks,
Okay.
animations. And you have lots of amusement parks in North Korea, the Luna Park, for example, at the heart of Pyongyang. And most of the things have been built by this Italian company, which used to be specialized in this business. So the exchange, because Italy is part of the European countries that have diplomatic relations with North Korea. So yes, you had in these shops, and people could pay in dollar also, of course in North Korean won, but also in dollar or in euro. So, and it was quite vivid at that time, and very interesting. I mean, yeah, it was quite vivid and interesting to see that.
No, explain a little bit about this, because I used to date somebody whose family was from North Korea. Her grandmother, and I remember that she was telling me that her parents, that were living in Japan, Korean parents, they would go every once in a while to North Korea and bring a bunch of cash, and there were a lot of dollars. That's what the money they would bring. Could you explain to just a little bit about this double currency? How does it work? How do you get access? Do this private little business? Do they get somehow their revenue in dollars? How does it work? Do they come from the customers that are like public servants, customers? Do they come from the private sectors? How are these dollars introduced in the country? I mean, do you have any idea about this?
I think the North Korean economy is officially it's fully collectivist economy, but you have, I mean, from the time of Kim Jong-il at the beginning of the 21st century, some kind of private business had been authorized, and you have lots of markets even in the countryside, and it has developed. So it means that even the elite people from the elite of power can have some kind of businesses along their official duties. Lots of women, I mean, wives basically, are leading some, I mean, annex businesses or small activities that are private. Of course, the North Korean won has values in North Korea, but foreign currencies have more values. And as you have lots of business with China, I would say not really legal business. You have lots of foreign currencies that are circulating, and also the regime is really willing to accumulate lots of foreign currencies because it's easier after that to buy what it needs for its, I would say, the missile business, for example, or the nuclear business, because it's bought outside of North Korea. So it needs dollars. So there are lots of dollars and euro that are circulating also in North Korea.
Interesting, interesting. Um, One more thing, like, what do you think it's from now looking at the years ahead? What would be the challenges that North Korea would face in terms of growth, developments, or other major improvements?
So I think the situation now is not very good in terms of economy. The reason are first the sanctions, international sanctions that are very harsh. They are limiting the imports of oil, for example. So it has an impact on the whole industry. Um,
Could you
you
open a
also have
parenthesis here, because you have been, as you told me, you have been in military airplanes from UN, if I'm not mistaken, that were surveilling the area, the sea, facing North Korea, to check if the embargo was actually being respected, was being fulfilled. That means that no ships would come and bring oil to the country. Could you just tell us a little bit about that? Because that was interesting.
yeah, I mean the Security Council, or UN Security Council, is imposing sanctions to North Korea, and there is a system to control the application of the sanctions. And one of this surveillance system is is managed by 6 or 7 countries. I mean, Canada, Japan, US, South Korea, and including France. Because, as you may know, France has territories in Pacific, in New Caledonia and Polynesia. So there are some military capabilities that can be used once or twice a year to come to the area and to check in the Sea of China if there are some transfer of oil from one ship to another that could be to the benefit of North Korea.
Those ships would
So
be Chinese?
not necessarily. Could be some Central America or some African countries' ships, because it's the question of immatriculation of ships is very tricky. You have some ships that are from one country but registered
Yeah,
to another country.
of course.
So lots of ships are officially registered to African countries,
Right.
basically. But the thing is that this transfer can occur in Chinese territorial sea, so which means it's difficult to control. But I mean, the experience I had is that last year French planes, who is usually based in Polynesia, came to Japan for 2 or 3 weeks, I don't remember, to participate in this surveillance system. So I had a chance to board the plane for one of the missions they had above the East China Sea. And so it was, I mean, 4 or 5 hours of flight. And basically, they are patrolling in an area I don't really know where because it was secret. And so we checked. Sometimes you had 2 ships together. So the planes were going down to check and to ask the captain some information, take photo and everything. And we also had the chance to meet, I don't know if it was a chance, but we met some Chinese fighter planes that came to check what the French plane was doing. So it was not really tensed, but it shows that the situation is quite tricky and weird.
So funny, like it's like this round of dog chasing its tail. Like you are chasing and checking the security over North Korea, and China is checking you guys out, and probably you have American plane checking the Chinese as well. So
It's yes, yes. You had we saw at one moment we also saw a Chinese military ship and the Japanese military ship that they were very close. So they were, I mean, checking each other. It was
each other,
very, yeah, it's, as you say, it's a circle.
the circle.
Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting. This just this fact really kind of elucidates how the tension there it's really thick. And it could be really easily weaponized. Like if any mistakes, we have these launches that could be mistaken. They could end up in South Korea, could end up in Japan. You have the ships that are always very close to each other. They may end up even shooting to each other, like it happens, for example, with the Japanese and the Russians up in the Hoporyodo in the northern territories. So it's a very crucial area, and things are happening, but it's not in the news most of the time. Like we don't really hear about it. We hear it in general about little skirmishes and stuff here and there, but we never hear the specific what's really
Mm.
happening there. And we can see now the big picture where you have UN, you have countries like France and Western countries checking the embargo over North Korea, and then you have the Chinese there and the Japanese as well. So it's a very hot area, especially now. But as you mentioned the Chinese, I'm curious, like as you also told me, there's a fair good amount of tourism from Chinese into North Korea. Could you tell us about that? Because we never see that in the news so much.
It's basically, as you know, China is the used to be basically the we have to make an important. We have to say that before the pandemic and after the pandemic is different. So before the pandemic, China and North Korea had quite basically historically the relations are not that bad. So they had the main trade partners of North Korea is China. So before the pandemic, as I mentioned at the beginning, when I was speaking about the new economic policies, part of it was to slightly, I insist on the slightly, open North Korea to kind of tourism. That's why there is now, they opened a big ski station on the east side of the country. And you had in Sinuiju at the very border with China in just on the other side of the Yalu River in front of Dandong, the Chinese city. In Sinuiju, I went there one time and I just attended a show organized by a school, and part of the public were some Chinese people that came just for one day from Dandong. It was possible for Chinese tourists to have one day in North Korea, in Sinuiju. So it was, I mean, it shows that there is some kind of thinking about what can be done with tourism.
I'm curious though,
Uh,
like when the Chinese come, what kind of mindset they have? Because me and you, like as a Westerners, we would go North Korea and like see this the proverbial hermit kingdom, the enclosed country that has its own world in itself. Was that the same? Did they have the same impression? They have the same feeling of actually some sort of like looking through the keyhole of this country that it's been closed for years now? Did they have the same
I,
impression? Was more like let's take some pictures of
no, one thing I heard, I'm not sure about, is that there is a kind of nostalgia because North Korea, I mean, in the buildings, in the landscapes, in the, you know, the visual of North Korea looks like China 30 or 40 years ago. So there are some people who come to see what used to be something similar in their country when they were young. So there is a kind of nostalgia also. So yeah, there is maybe for some people some kind of curiosity, but there is also that kind of nostalgia, which is, I think, quite interesting to
And so you
see.
don't think they had that perception that as a Westerner would have of this totalitarian state that has imposed this regime with very limited freedoms, if we want to call it that way? You're saying they don't have that kind of I would say prejudice. I don't know if you want to call it prejudice, but definitely that set of ideas that we take for granted when we think of North Korea.
I don't think they have that kind of idea, or maybe some of them have, but as you know, China is not a totally liberal democracy. So I don't think it's really important. I mean, China and North Korea fought together during the Korean War. Their relation were not always good, but still, I mean, China and North Korea still have relationships. So even if, no, I think it's more curiosity and that kind of nostalgia I spoke about. I don't think they have the same view that we have. For us, it's, and for most of people in Western countries, North Korea is something like extraterrestrial country, which is, I think, a little bit exaggerated because people are very kind and
you've been there and you have returned 4 times, so they they didn't lock you up somewhere like some people would expect. But I said you have been able to go there and come back freely for 4 times, even though you had a guide that would take you around. But this is very interesting because it really shows the different perspective we from what Asian countries, how the Asian countries see this conflict, this political and cultural, ideological conflict between the West and a place like North Korea. As you mentioned, Chinese, coming from China, coming from, let's say, not a totally liberal democracy, they don't have that gap, so to speak, of oh, we're going somewhere where this regime is totally diverse from where we're coming from. This is very, very interesting aspect of this insights that you had in North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to go. I mean, it's hard to get a visa to go, but once you are there, I mean, you act when you are traveling in any country. I mean, when you respect the rules, when you understand some specificities, of course, you cannot go out alone, which is can be quite boring sometimes, but I mean, it's like that. I mean, I was there as a journalist. I was not there as a tourist. And
so let's say this. Let's say that once again. So you say that you were not allowed, once you returned to your hotel, you were not allowed to go by yourself and I'm just gonna go for a walk or a smoke. You weren't
yeah, you cannot. You cannot. If you want to go out, you need to contact your guide and go out with your guide.
With your guide, always with your guide.
It's like that. Yeah.
Always. Okay. And were you allowed? Do you have any time frame that you could, for example, take pictures? Were they really strict on that?
I mean, it depends. You cannot take photo of military people or military installation, which is in a way quite understandable. It's not only in North Korea. But most of the time you ask, I mean, yeah, you can ask and most of the time you can take photo. I mean, it's as long as it's not sensitive thing.
Sure. So one last question, like, I'm curious, like, what do you see? How do you see the changes? How do you see the trajectory from now to the next few years? We've seen, was that yesterday that it was declared this new law that would basically make it irreversible for North Korea to be a nuclear power, and so do you see this tension exasperating from now on? Is it going to get worse, or maybe the country it's going to feel a bit of the positive effect of a free market, of so to speak, a free market, but a little bit of injection of free market and circulation of ideas? If they have cell phones, I'm sure they have some access in websites that are others than the North Korean ones. So
I think that what we are experiencing in the world now is kind of bipolarization, between this liberal democracy and what we call autocracies. Um, we are speaking a lot about Russia and China, but I mean North Korea is in the same camp of China and Russia, and since the beginning of the Ukraine war, we saw North Korea supporting strongly Vladimir Putin in his war against Ukraine. I mean, North Korea recognized the four east of Ukraine new republic that Russia established, and U.S. Says that North Korea is providing Russian army with some ammunitions and maybe some other weapons, which means that it's not for free. In exchange, North Korea can maybe receive what it's really needs, which means oil, raw materials, maybe some help for agriculture. I mean, because the situation in North Korea is very difficult, especially just to feed the people. The agriculture is not going well, and the main and because the country is closed since 2020 and the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. So since then, the situation that had been slightly improved in the last 7 or 8 years suffered a lot, and the economy and agriculture suffered a lot. So lots of people are experiencing some kind of, I wouldn't say famine, but some food shortages, and the government, the authorities are recognizing it and are supporting everything that can be done to improve the situation. So I think that with that kind of bipolarization, China and Russia will not apply the sanctions, UN sanctions, as they used to apply them. So maybe trade with China and maybe trade with Russia will increase. That could ultimately benefit North Korea, because I think North Korea really needs some kind of trade to improve its economy.
But
So that's it. That's interesting to see that.
But I just want to make it clear for us. So, but when you were there, you weren't, let's say, taken as a journalist to see the places where, let's say, they are most struggling with food and maybe even shelter and the overall lifestyles. Again, like where the more people, poor people are. You were never taken to those, let's say, borderline areas in terms of
No, never. No.
never.
No, I visited, of course, Pyongyang. I visited Nampo, the big port, which is on the Yellow Sea, which is very important port. And I went to Sinuiju also by car. So I crossed some places, but where the life seems quite difficult. But at the same time, it's the western side of North Korea is I mean, that's where the agriculture is the strongest. So it's not the place where the difficulties are the most exacerbated.
Right.
And I didn't visit the most difficult place, or what the United Nations is saying. The situation is difficult.
All right. Well, thank you, Philippe, for your time. It was very interesting to know a little bit more from the inside of what's going on in North Korea, as not many people have access to it, and especially 4 times like you have. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much.